Inside a sterile, humless room in Santa Clara, California, sits a small piece of silicon no larger than a postage stamp, yet it carries the weight of the entire global economy. It is a masterpiece of complexity, etched with billions of microscopic pathways that pulse with the rhythm of artificial thought. This is not just a chip. It is the engine of the fourth industrial revolution. For years, the world looked at the man in the black leather jacket and saw a niche player in the world of video games, a provider of flashy graphics for teenagers. But while the rest of Silicon Valley was chasing social media likes and smartphone apps, Jensen Huang was playing a different game, a game that required a level of foresight that bordered on prophecy. He wasn't just building hardware, he was building a monopoly on the future of intelligence itself. This is the story of how NVIDIA went from a booth at a Denny's restaurant to the most important company on the planet, and how Jensen Huang won a war that most people didn't even know was being fought. Welcome back to the Null Theory channel. If you enjoy deep, meaningful stories, please take a moment to like, share this video, and subscribe to our channel to support us. To truly understand the titan that is NVIDIA, we have to travel back to 1993, to a world that smelled of cheap coffee and cigarette smoke. The setting wasn't a glass-walled boardroom, but a worn-out booth at a Denny's in East San Jose. Imagine the scene. 3 engineers, Jensen Huang, Chris Malachowski, and Curtis Preem, sitting under the flickering fluorescent lights, surrounded by the clatter of silverware and the low hum of early morning commuters. At that time, Jensen was only 30 years old, but he carried a quiet intensity that set him apart. He wasn't just a brilliant engineer, he was an immigrant who had arrived in the United States from Taiwan by way of Thailand, a boy who had once worked as a dishwasher in that very same restaurant chain. That history mattered. The grease, the heat, and the relentless pace of a commercial kitchen had forged in him a humility and a survival instinct that would become NVIDIA's DNA. They had $40,000 between them, and a vision that most people at the time found laughable. They wanted to bring 3D graphics to the personal computer. The environment of Silicon Valley in the early 90s was one of beige boxes and spreadsheets. Computers were tools for accounting, not for art or immersive worlds. But Jensen and his co-founders saw a coming wave of 3D gaming that no one else believed in. They used the Denny's as their makeshift headquarters because it was the only place that wouldn't kick them out for lingering over a single cup of coffee for 5 hours. On paper napkins, amidst the smell of burnt toast and maple syrup, they sketched the architecture of what would become the GPU. They chose the name NVIDIA, inspired by the Latin word invidia, meaning envy. It was a bold, almost arrogant choice, a declaration that they would create something the rest of the world would crave. But the path from that booth to the pinnacle of tech was paved with the kind of crushing failure that would have broken lesser men. NVIDIA's early years were characterized by a visceral, heart-pounding struggle for oxygen. Their first product, the NVON, was an ambitious disaster. It used an unconventional mathematical approach, quadrilateral mapping, while the rest of the industry, led by Microsoft, moved toward triangles. It was a total rejection. Jensen often talks about the emotional weight of those days. He lived in a state of constant low-grade terror. The company was essentially out of money, and he was forced to make the most painful decision of his life, laying off half of his staff. He describes the experience of looking into the eyes of talented people he had recruited, people who believed in the dream, and telling them he could no longer pay them. That trauma stayed with him. It created a paranoia that he still carries today. He realized that in the semiconductor industry, there is no safety net. You are either the predator or you are the prey being eaten. To survive, they had to be perfect. They bet everything, every last cent, every hour of sleep, on their next chip, the Riva 128. If that chip had failed to launch, NVIDIA would have been liquidated before the world even knew its name. The Riva 128 succeeded, but the victory brought no rest. Jensen instilled a culture of perpetual urgency. He famously told his team, "Our company is 30 days from going out of business," a mantra he repeated even when they had millions in the bank. He didn't want them comfortable. He wanted them hungry. By the late 90s, NVIDIA had invented the term GPU, graphics processing unit, with the launch of the GeForce 256. They had won the gaming war, but Jensen's mind was already wandering into a much darker, much deeper territory. He noticed that a small group of academic researchers were hacking his graphics cards. They weren't using them for Quake or Doom. They were using them for massive mathematical simulations. Because a GPU is designed to do thousands of small tasks simultaneously, like calculating the light on every pixel of a character's face, it was accidentally perfect for the kind of parallel math required for complex science. This leads us to the most significant gamble in the history of computing. In 2006, Jensen Huang decided to pivot the entire company toward a new software architecture called CUDA. This would allow anyone to use NVIDIA's chips for general-purpose computing. On the surface, it sounded like a technical detail, but for NVIDIA, it was a massive, expensive, and lonely trek into the wilderness. For nearly a decade, NVIDIA spent billions of dollars on CUDA. They designed every chip with this extra capability, which made the chips larger, more expensive to build, and harder to sell to the gaming market. Wall Street was brutal. Analysts called it a bridge to nowhere. Investors demanded that Jensen focus on the core business of gaming and stop chasing this scientific computing fantasy. The stock price languished. Jensen was mocked. For 10 years, he was a man shouting into a void, ignored by the very industry he was trying to save. The emotional toll of being misunderstood for a decade is hard to overstate. Jensen was a CEO who had to defend a failing stock price every quarter, while knowing in his gut that he was building something world-changing. He was waiting for the software world to catch up to his hardware. That moment finally arrived in 2012, in what is now known as the Big Bang of artificial intelligence. At a computer vision competition called ImageNet, a group of researchers used 2 NVIDIA GPUs and the CUDA platform to build a neural network called AlexNet. They didn't just win the competition, they outperformed every other human-designed algorithm by a margin that seemed like magic. They proved that if you gave a computer enough data and enough NVIDIA chips, it could learn to see. Suddenly, the silence that had surrounded Jensen for 10 years was replaced by a deafening roar. Every researcher in the world realized that the engine for AI had already been built. Google, Microsoft, and Amazon began buying every NVIDIA chip they could get their hands on. But Jensen didn't just sit back and sell hardware. He realized that he had something more valuable than silicon. He had the ecosystem. Because he had spent a decade subsidizing CUDA, every AI researcher in the world had learned to code on NVIDIA's platform. He had created a moat of knowledge. To switch to a competitor was no longer just about buying a different chip. It was about abandoning 10 years of expertise. Jensen had effectively become the gatekeeper of the future. The environment inside NVIDIA's headquarters in Santa Clara today reflects this intensity. It is a place that operates on the speed of light. Jensen, still in his signature black leather jacket, a uniform of consistency and focus, leads with a flat organizational structure. He doesn't have a corner office. He moves through the building, engaging with engineers at the front lines. He demands a level of excellence that is often described as brutal. But his employees are driven by the knowledge that they are building the brain of the next civilization. They are the architects of the data centers that will drive our cars, diagnose our cancers, and perhaps, one day, match our own intelligence. Yet, as NVIDIA's valuation soared toward $3 trillion, the stakes changed. Jensen is no longer just a tech CEO. He is a geopolitical figure. His chips are now considered a strategic resource, much like oil was in the 20th century. The U.S. government has placed strict export controls on NVIDIA's most powerful chips, fearing they could be used to shift the global balance of power. The boy who washed dishes at Denny's is now a man whose decisions can affect the security of nations. Through it all, he remains obsessed with the next impossible problem. He isn't interested in the success of yesterday. He is already living in 2030. The story of NVIDIA is a testament to the power of the long game. It reminds us that progress is not a straight line, but a series of lonely years followed by a sudden explosion. Jensen Huang didn't just build a company, he willed a new era into existence through sheer stubborn perseverance. He reminds us that the most important things are often the ones that everyone else is laughing at. As the world moves into an age of artificial thought, we are all living in a house that Jensen built. The silence of the data centers is the sound of his victory. A victory born in a dusty booth at a Denny's, fueled by a fear of bankruptcy and realized through a vision that never wavered. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the Silicon Empire. As you look at the technology around you, remember that behind every screen, there is a story of a man who refused to stop until the world finally saw what he saw.